Content warning. This episode contains depictions and discussions of suicide. Listener discretion is advised. A foggy night, high up in the hills above Hollywood. The moon hangs full in the sky, reflecting off the fog and bathing the hillside in a hazy glow. From up here, the city of Los Angeles can typically be seen stretching out for miles in every direction. Its glittering lights an endless sea pulsating with the beating energy of a city teeming with life. But on this night, several miles from the nightlife down in Hollywood itself, it's quiet, still, unsettling. Headlights cut through the fog. From the darkness emerges a beat-up sedan. It's doing 50 in a 35. Inside are 3 teenagers, taking a joyride up the winding back roads. "Bobby, slow down," says Patricia from the back seat. She clutches a seatbelt tight in her hands. Bobby looks up at the rearview mirror, one hand casually holding the wheel, and smiles deviously at Patricia. He presses the gas pedal a little harder. The car goes faster, speeding around a bend. In the passenger seat, Carl grabs the handle and lets out a frightened chuckle. "She's right, man. You can't see anything in this fog. Probably a good idea to slow down." "Aw, you babies are no fun," says Bobby. He takes his foot off the gas and the car slows. Bobby uses his free hand to pull a cigarette from his pocket. Carl lights it for him. Patricia coughs and rolls down her window, her hair tangling in the wind. "I still don't know about this, guys." "Relax, Patty," says Bobby, using the name he knows she hates. "We've done this before." "Really?" asks Patty. "Well, no," says Carl, "but we've almost done it a couple times." "It'll be easy," says Bobby, getting impatient. "We'll park behind a ridge where no cops can see the car, hightail it down the ridge to the sign, hop the fence, spray some big eyes and a mouth on the O, and get the hell out. Piece of cake." "I still think this is a bad idea," says Patricia, looking into the darkness in the fog around her. "It's so foggy, we'll get lost." Bobby sighs and rolls his eyes. "The fog will keep the park rangers from seeing us. It'll be fine. We'll be legends at school. Now everybody shut up and let's just get there." Bobby turns the radio up, ending the conversation. Patricia sits back in her seat. She knows better than to argue with Bobby when he's got his mind made up. They come to the ridge, a small hill with thick vegetation. Bobby pulls in behind it and turns the radio and headlights off. "Okay, everybody out." "I can't see anything," says Patricia. Bobby shushes her and pulls out his keychain, revealing a small key light. He flicks it on and she sees a path ahead, covered in a thick soup of fog. Bobby marches forward into the fog. Carl shrugs and follows. After a minute, Patricia sighs and runs to catch up. They walk in silence. A stiff breeze blows and Patricia holds her jacket tight. Carl notices moving closer to her for warmth. A sound from the hills. Patricia jumps and stumbles. Carl catches her and stops her from tumbling over. They all hold their breath. Bobby takes a chance and shines his light in the direction of the noise. Nothing. "Babies," smirks Bobby. After a few more uneventful minutes, the 3 see their destination close by. Patricia's breath catches in her throat. From here, the Hollywood sign is massive. Its big white letters standing tall, visible to the millions of people who live in its shadow. As they approach the sign, Bobby pulls out the spray can he's been carrying. "All right, time to get to work." But as Bobby begins to walk forward, he stops. His eyes stare straight forward. "What's up, Bobby? You good?" asks Carl. Bobby replies as quietly as he can. "I thought I saw something." Patricia, already sick of this night, rolls her eyes at him. "Babies," she says. She grabs the spray paint from Bobby's hand and marches towards the fence. "I'll do it." Carl and Bobby both look at her, surprised. Carl smiles at her. She gives him a wink. As she begins to climb, the metal of the fence digging into her skin, Patricia starts regretting her impulsivity. But with Carl and Bobby looking on, she can't back down now. She makes her way up the side, but something catches her attention. She looks up at the closest letter, the H, standing almost 50 feet tall in front of her, the fog seeming to dissipate as she does. On the top is a woman. She looks like she's in her 20s, but she's dressed like an extra from a gangster movie. The young woman looks down to the city below. Hello? Stutters Patricia. The woman looks over to Patricia and gives her a sad acknowledgement before turning her gaze back to the sea of lights stretching out in front of her. As Patricia looks on, she realizes what the stranger on top of the H is about to do. "No!" shouts Patricia. But it's too late. She watches as the young woman takes a step forward and disappears into thin air. Hi, I'm Bianca Lopez, and I'd like to tell you a ghost story. But not just any story. Our ghosts don't haunt desolate farmhouses, suburban attics, or castles on the Scottish moor. The spirits in these stories are the larger-than-life characters of Tinseltown's past. Whether a big-time producer, a rising starlet, or just another face in the crowd, these souls and their search for glory came to an inglorious and sometimes tragic end. So come with us as we peek behind the curtain of Hollywood's glitz and glamour and go beyond the veil on this week's Tinseltown Ghost Stories. It's the most famous real estate sign in the world. Only intended to stand for a year or two, the Hollywood sign and its bright white lettering has withstood the test of time to become a beacon of possibility for hopeful dreamers all over the world. Originally reading Hollywoodland, the marquee was paid for by LA Times publisher Harry Chandler. Like other newspaper-owning businessmen of the era, Chandler knew that publicity was king of Tinseltown and used this flashy attempt to drive interest in a brand new development. It was called Hollywoodland, an upscale residential neighborhood at the foot of Mount Lee, filled with some of the prettiest houses you've ever seen. Built for $21,000 in 1923, construction of the sign employed over 200 laborers, cut 7 miles of new road into the hillside, and dug an astounding 300,000 cubic yards out of Mount Lee. All of that work clearly paid off, as the sign still stands 100 years later, though not without a significant amount of regular maintenance. And although the sign is 4 letters shorter today, it's become a massive advertisement for the entertainment industry's home base in the greater Los Angeles area. It's also an unmissable sight welcoming budding actors, writers, and filmmakers as they drive into downtown LA in pursuit of something greater. Artists who for over a century have come to Los Angeles chasing their dreams of fame and fortune, an approach to life now synonymous with Hollywood. The sign is as big as any of those hopes and dreams. Standing almost 50 feet tall and built into the side of a small mountain, you can see the sign from almost any point in the LA basin. You can also see it far above while flying high over the city. Close to the classic Griffith Park Observatory, one of 2 main access points to seeing the sign up close. Of course, up close is relative. There's a large fence with very clear "do not enter" warnings that prevent most people from getting too close, and that's after the 4-mile hike it takes to get there. There are several reasons city officials prevent the public from accessing the sign. First, it's surprisingly easy to make the letters look like other letters. On several occasions, the sign has been, shall we say, rewritten by locals. It was famously altered to read Hollyweed, to reflect state law progressing on cannabis, not once, but twice in 1976 and 2017. More importantly, public access is a big safety concern. For several decades, the sign, which has been owned by the city since 1944, was the victim of a lack of public funding and maintenance, falling into disrepair and becoming a blight on the city's image. Every time a rare but roaring storm came through, the letters would crumble even further, and even the scaffolding holding them in place became hazardous to anyone close by. Then in 1978, none other than the original Playboy himself, Hugh Hefner, held a fundraiser to rebuild and replace the sign, and it's been receiving regular maintenance ever since. Thanks, Hugh. As a result, while the neighborhood below is filled with bright lights and brighter stars, the area around the sign itself is much less well-traveled. However, there are a few trails that pass close by. For anyone who ascends these hills, the feeling of being disconnected is palpable. It's an eerie place, so close to civilization and yet so far from the sights and sounds of city life. There's also one more good reason not to let anyone close to the sign. Peg Entwistle, a young woman who came out to LA seeking more in life, but who ended up losing everything. When you look at her life, it makes sense that Peg Entwistle would end up pursuing a career on the stage and screen, even though it started far from Hollywood in a little town in Wales. Born in 1908 in Port Talbot, UK, her parents, Robert Entwistle and Emily Stevenson, were both professional actors and had met working in the London theater scene. Their love was a toured event, and a baby came into the picture very quickly for the young couple. Robert and Emily named her Millicent Lillian Entwistle, but her mother took to referring to her new baby affectionately as Babs. Robert and Emily weren't the only actors in the family either. Robert's younger brother Charles was even more successful, and he doted on his niece Babs more than anyone else. The whole family was able to make a living this way in large part because they were, by all accounts, incredibly talented performers. The brothers Entwistle even performed in Julius Caesar at King George V's coronation in 1911. Soon after, Charles would travel across the pond to New York City for the bright lights of Broadway. And although Robert felt the same draw, Emily did not. Instead, the pair attempted to make their new family work while living in a small flat in the West Kensington section of London. Unfortunately, the pair were not able to work through their differences, and Robert and Emily divorced in 1912. Of the two, Robert was much more inclined to parenthood than Emily, and Babs ended up with her father. Uncle Charles would soon return to help his brother care for the young child, and he brought with him a pair of American actresses, his wife, Jane Ross, and her sister, Laurette. Robert and Babs were both immediately smitten with Laurette. She had a whip-sharp American wit that provided a complete change of pace to the stiff upper lip of the British theater. And although his brother had already married one of the Ross sisters, that didn't stop Robert from marrying the other. In 1913, the five Entwistles boarded a ship for the United States, and they never looked back. Now a part of the New York theater community, young Babs had a new stepmom that she absolutely idolized. At the tender age of just 6, young Millicent made the choice to give up the nickname her mother had given her and instead opted to take on a much more American one, that of the title character Laurette played in the first show she saw on Broadway, Peg O' My Heart. For little Peg, those first few years in the States were filled with what some might call the American dream. First, there were the new American grandparents who lived in Cincinnati, and although they could be cold and distant, Peg delighted in the occasional vacation to the Midwest. Robert found stage work on Broadway, while Laurette took some time away from the theater to add to their family, first with Milton in 1917, followed by Bobby in 1919. Now with 2 younger brothers to care for, and most likely boss around, Peg's world seemed to only get bigger. Unfortunately, a series of completely unexpected tragedies would cause her world to crumble. first shock came in 1921, when Laurette contracted bacterial meningitis and passed away. Robert and his 3 young children took a train back to Cincinnati, where Laurette was laid to rest. Suddenly a widower, Robert found himself juggling both his demanding theater job and having to care for 3 kids. Although barely a teenager, Peg stepped into a more motherly role with her brothers. Sadly, in 1922, barely a year after Laurette had died, Robert was hit by a car while crossing the street. He lingered on for a few months, but in December 1922, he succumbed to his injuries. Once again, Peg and her brothers were on that lonely train back to Cincinnati, where they buried Robert next to his wife, Laurette. The devastation of the personal tragedy was compounded by the fact that Peg now had to live with her step-grandparents, with whom she had very little relationship. And compared to the vibrant theater community she had known in London or New York, Cincinnati was a much different, lonelier place. Add to that, her young brother Bobby began to get very sick, and at just 14 years old, it seemed the weight of the entire world was ready to crash down on Peg. Once more, it was her Uncle Charles who came to her rescue. At this point, Charles had taken up permanent residence in sunny Santa Monica, California, a beachside community a few miles west of Los Angeles. Believing the Southern California air would do Bobby some good, he packed up his brother's children and moved them out west. The year? 1923. The very same year, Henry Chandler commissioned a large sign in the Hollywood Hills to advertise his residential properties. Unsurprisingly, Peg took to her new home like any new California girl would. She was bright, beautiful, and well-liked in her high school, the Hollywood Theater Community School. Her teachers all said she had a Mona Lisa smile. Once she graduated, she struck out to follow in her family's footsteps. Peg returned to New York City and, with a little help from Uncle Charles, joined the legendary New York Theater Guild and got her first role on Broadway. Things seemed to be going well for Peg at first. She worked with some legends of her time, starring alongside Drew Barrymore's great-grandmother Ethel in a production of Hamlet. She married fellow actor Robert Lee Keith, and it seemed as though she would follow in her family's footsteps to a successful career in theater. Unfortunately, even being an early 20th century Nepo baby couldn't keep Peg's star on the rise. Some of her shows were themselves to blame. One review of The Uninvited Guests, which closed only 7 performances into opening, said that she gave a performance considerably better than the play warranted. Her marriage also turned abusive, and after a chaotic divorce, Peg decided to finally leave New York behind. But rather than return to California, her draw to the stage pushed her back to Cincinnati, where she became a big fish in a small pond. And that worked for Peg for a while. At the same time, film was slowly replacing theater as the entertainment mode of choice for Americans everywhere. The advent of sound and film meant that stage actors could finally use their voice and declare their presence in the medium. As a result, every performer who dreamed of national recognition began heading out west to Hollywood. This includes Peg, who already had a leg up with her Uncle Charles still in the neighborhood. Back in Los Angeles in 1931, she got very close to her big break a few times, including being shortlisted for a role that eventually went to a little-known actress named Katharine Hepburn. Finally, while performing on stage, she caught the eye of an executive with RKO Pictures, one of the biggest studios in the studio system, which at the time ran Tinseltown. This led to her becoming a contracted performer with RKO, along with her first big role in David O. Selznick's 13 Women. Finally, after years of struggling to break through, Peg had a role that would allow her to be seen and appreciated for her talents. She had her first Hollywood money, which meant that she could move out of her uncle's place and into her own apartment. Everything seemed to be falling into place, right up until the film was released. You see, Peg had been cast as a lesbian in an openly gay relationship, at a time when even pre-code Hollywood was hesitant to promote, quote, alternate lifestyles. 14 minutes of the film had been cut prior to release, including all of Peg's scenes. And with a release that merited little critical or financial success, Peg was quietly released from her contract. Then, one morning, in December 1932, a hiker was out exploring the land around the sign. This was easy to do because no fence existed to stop anyone from getting close. She came upon a strange sight: a jacket, purse, and one lonely shoe. The item seemed fairly new, and the hiker opened the purse searching for some sort of identification. Instead, she pulled out a note that read, "I am afraid I am a coward. I am sorry for everything. If I had done this a long time ago, it would have saved a lot of pain. P.E." Taken aback at this discovery, the hiker peered curiously over the side of the mountain. There, laying in the shadow of the beacon of hopes and dreams, was the body of Peg Entwistle. The night before, she had left her Uncle Charles's house, saying she was going to a bookstore. Instead, she made the trek up the hillside, first by car and then on foot, to the Hollywood land sign. There, she climbed a maintenance ladder to the top of the H and, looking out over the city, took one final leap into the unknown. 10 years after her father Robert had himself passed away one cold December night, she was only 24. Peg's remains would take one final train ride back to Cincinnati, where her ashes were laid to rest by her Uncle Charles, his wife Jane, and her brothers Bobby and Milton. She's buried next to her father, Robert, and her stepmother, Laurette. One last tragic reunion for a family of actors whose show had ended all too soon. While she was never able to achieve the sort of fame she sought during her all-too-brief life, in the years that followed her tragic death, Peg Entwistle has become arguably the most famous ghost in all of Hollywood. It all started in 1949. That's when the H, the very same letter that Peg climbed to her untimely demise, toppled over in a storm. It was soon followed by other letters, giving the sign an unnaturally decayed appearance staring down at the city. And while the city did give it a bit of a facelift when they took ownership of the sign, it turns out that was only the beginning of the haunting. Over the past several decades, a number of sightseers, hikers, joggers, dog walkers, and even Griffith Park rangers have attested to stumbling upon a strange and ghostly apparition standing atop or around the sign. Folks who see it all say the same thing. They see a young woman in her 20s, dressed in attire that would fit 1932 much better than any contemporary style, and always with a somewhat forlorn expression. Peg clearly has a favorite night for a performance, when a fog has rolled in and Mount Lee takes on a more ethereal nature. Maybe it's because the city below is somewhat blocked out and she's easier to spot. There's also the smell, gardenias. A lovely floral scent, gardenias are unmistakable, with a rich creaminess and slightly tropical undertones of coconut and peach. But although gardenias don't grow anywhere near the sign, they do have another connection. They were part of Peg's favorite perfume. What does vary is where she is when people see her. Some swear that she's taking a leisurely walk down the path to the sign. Others have seen her standing on top of the H, contemplating the city down below, almost as if she doesn't recognize it. In 2014, one woman even swears that she saw Peg floating in the air far above the sign. Although people have tried to approach her, she never sticks around for very long. After only a moment or two, she disappears from view, leaving gawking onlookers with more questions than answers. So, why does she do it? Why does a woman who began life a continent and an ocean away, who is buried alongside her beloved parents, all taken well before their time, remain tethered to a dream she was never able to achieve. Perhaps it's because in death, Peg is the perfect representation of the hopeful dreamers that come to Tinseltown, seeking something that will fill a space in their heart, forever looking down at the stars as a reminder that every great success story comes with a price. Thanks for listening to this episode of Tinseltown Ghost Stories. I hope you enjoyed this peek behind the curtain. I can't wait to show you more. If you want to help spread the word, please leave a 5-star review, click that follow button, and share with your friends. I really appreciate it. You can also find us on Patreon. I'm your host, Bianca Lopez. You can find me on Instagram at Bianca P. Lopez. This episode was written by Kyle F. Andrews and directed by Morgan Rudder, produced by Kyle F. Andrews and Cameron Bile, co-produced by Emily Castro, audio editing by Zach Morrison, with sound recording, audio engineering, and mixing by Alyssa Rose at Honeydew Studios in North Hollywood. Original score composed by Robertson Hobbs. Tinseltown Ghost Stories is part of the Film Frontier Podcast Network. You can follow the show on Instagram and Threads at Film Frontier Studios. Please drop us a line and let us know what you think of this week's episode. We can't wait to hear from you. We'll be back next month for another new full-length episode about creepy locations and the crimes and secrets that haunt them to this day. Until then, stay spooky.
As a filmmaker, I'm fascinated by the endless ways to tell a story in pictures. And I find my inspiration in films by great directors. Whether you're just a casual film fan or a full-fledged filmmaker yourself, the Director Series podcast will deepen your love of cinema with in-depth breakdowns of your favorite films and directors. Each month brings together a collection of films from an influential filmmaker or film movement and explores the overlapping themes and ideas that tie them together in a bid to inspire the next generation of storytellers. Look for the Director Series podcast on your favorite podcatcher, or go to patreon.com/podfrontier to learn more.